something like a symbol on your screen, okay? Which means recorded on. Yeah, so very well. We are in the round number 5 of this tournament, this important tournament. And we have 2 important teams here, always important teams, never not important. So the first one, proposition team, is from Abruzzi and should be Liceo D'Annunzio, right? Yeah. And the opposition team will be from Lombardia, Fedebaters, right? Yes, very good. And the motion is this house supports the removal from public spaces of works of art of historical value that express values currently considered outdated. Very interesting as a motion, and we are anxious to understand what we are going to say. So please, Stefano and Tile, please say something.
Good evening, everybody. I am Tile Mazzoni.
Good evening, I'm Stefano Albergo, and I will be a judge of this debate.
Okay, very good. You know perfectly the rule of this game, yeah? And I will keep time by the famous application, and it will make a sound, a bad sound, ding, after 1 minute. It means that you can ask POIs, and that's the sound. Yeah, very good. And the same sound after 7 minutes, it will mean that you cannot ask any POI anymore. And when you will be at 8 minutes, it will ring again and again to understand that you have to stop your speech. The last speech lasts for 4 minutes, and there's no chance to ask for POIs in the 4th speech, okay? Any question? Anything to say? Okay, Stefano and Tile, can we start? Okay, so we are proud to give the floor to the first speaker from proposition team, and she is Martina, I think. Okay, Martina, when you want, please start.
Okay, I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Hi, everybody. I'm the first speaker of the proposition team. This motion concerns the tension between historical memory, artistic freedom, and evolving social values. It asks whether works of art that have a historical significance but express values now considered outdated, offensive, or harmful should remain in shared public spaces. At its core, this debate is about public space as an endorsement. So does displaying work in a public space imply the approval of the value it represents? Then another main point of this debate is the tension between historical preservation and moral progress. So should historical works of art be preserved as part of collective memory, or they should be removed to reflect contemporary ethical standards? Another point is the opposition between collective memory and public harm, and relocation and erasure. So I would like to define some key terms of this motion. When we are talking about public space, we mean areas founded or maintained by public bodies that are meant for general access. For example, parks, government buildings, public schools, and so on. By works of art of historical value, we mean artworks that matter for heritage, art, history, or local identity, and not, for example, random decoration. So we mean statues, monuments, murals, and commemorative installations. Works of art that express values considered outdated means works that normalize frameworks now broadly judged incompatible with our civic standing. For example, some monuments that glorify slavery or misogyny or apartheid ideologies and so on. Because we think that there is a huge difference between a history book and a monument, because a book teaches us what happened, while a monument tells us who to cheer for. So we want to stop the cheering, but not the teaching. So we would like not to remove this work of art, but we would like to relocate them, for example, in storages or places that can still be
Joy,
yes.
don't you believe that relocating a monument makes it lose some of its own values?
Why? Because we would relocate only monuments that are considered dangerous or not compatible with nowadays values. So it is. We would like to preserve them, because we would like not only to preserve its historical value, but also the people who are addressed at that they could be no thanks. They could be offended by these works of art, but I'm going to talk about it in my first argument. So I would like to say our criteria. We would like to prevent the as I said, we do not want to remove them, because we would like to defend the freedom that from imposed exposure, because individual no thanks should retain the freedom to not to be exposed against their will to artistic or cultural works that are disturbing, offensive, or that promote values that are considered harmful. And also, remembering the past does not mean glorify it. So societies have a duty to remember historical events, even traumatic or problematic ones, in order to understand them critically. However, constant memorialization can sometimes prevent cultural value. So a certain degree of historical forgetting may be necessary to make space, no thanks, for new artistic expression that are now entirely defined by past traumas or ideologies. So we win this debate when we demonstrate that the removing those works of art improves social equality and cohesion. And when we show you that it prevents history better and not, or at least not worse, through responsible relocation or a better context. So I'll now move to our team line. I'm going to bring you two arguments. The first one is about public displays, public endorsement. The second one is called "The History Can Exist Without Pedestals." And the third one that Francesca is going to bring is about democratic legitimacy. So we believe that pressure values harms citizen and undermines equal civic membership, because government use monuments to identify, to signal identity and continuity. So if we keep these words, we are choosing to keep signs of some values that are now outdated, and that can bring harm to some part of the population. For example, there are if there's a statue of someone that brought slavery to a state, keep that statue in place of honor can make it seem like those values are still respected, and can make people feel oppressed and not understood. Also, public monuments sometimes glorify wrong values. So, moving on to my second argument, I would like to say that history can exist without pedestals, because relocating, as I said before, this work of art increases historical understanding and reduces myth-making, which is very dangerous, because public spaces reward simple narratives. For example, someone can be considered as a hero or a villain, because when you see a statue, for example, in a public places, you do not read the history of that people. You just have a superficial impression of that historical person. So, to conclude, I would like to say that for the reason we explained, so to ensure public safety and prevent those works of art, and to ensure safety, we would like to relocate them and remove them.
9 minutes and 1 second. Okay. Alberto, Stefano is okay, and Tilo is okay, very well. So we can go to the second speaker of this debate, and I think she's Visconti. Yes. Filippo, okay. When you want, Filippo.
Okay. My speech will start in 3, 2, 1. The motion we're debating today is not only about drawings, pictures, statues, and monuments, but it is about whether or not we want to fully acknowledge our history and our passage on Earth, or instead we want to delete it and hypocritically ignore it. But first of all, I would more generally try to speak of what is art and what do we mean with the word art. Now, art is one of the most ancient ways for humans to express their humanity. It is a natural and spontaneous way for people to express themselves and their humanity. Not only, over the years, art has become one of the most efficient ways for people to express their identity. It has become a symbol of nations and peoples and their identity, and a sign of their passage on Earth. Therefore, art is also a sign of our passage on Earth, and it is therefore a part of our history. Now, here I would like to briefly rebut and refute what has been said by proposition team, because they not only did they not give us a proper problem analysis stating why maintaining these works of art is a problem in the status quo, but also they divided monuments and arts from history. However, this distinction is wrong. It's not correct, because when we actually look at it, works of art are, no thank you, they are an expression of history. They are connected to the historical context when they were built and created. Therefore, we cannot separate them one from the other. A work of art is an expression of the historical context, and the motion stated it very clearly. It talked about works of art of historical value. Therefore, monuments have an historical value, and they are not to be separated from history. Now, why do we think that removing these works of art is harmful? First of all, because as we said, people would lose their identity, because art is a form of identity, of expression of their identity. People would not recognize themselves anymore. No, thank you. They would not recognize themselves in something else. They would lose themselves and their identity. And not only their identity, but their history as well, because art is, as I said, a sign of our passage on earth. And so it is a symbol of the history of a nation, of a people, of a society. Not only that, it goes even beyond this. It is also a way for people to express their humanity, something that is not related to values and history, but it's something that goes beyond all of this. It's a humanity in the general sense, something that will never change. It's an expression of what we are as people. Now, I would also like to talk briefly about the stakeholders that are. Yeah, thank you.
You mentioned losing identity. Would you think that me, Afro-American, looking at a colonial statue, if I were to delete it, then I would lose my identity looking at it, not looking at it?
Well, we cannot deny that a history of enslavement is part of, unfortunately, is part of the history of Afro-Americans and of native people from Africa and the native people of America. It is a sad part of their history, of course, but it is part of that. And it is the reason why we have, for example, Black History Month, is to commemorate these things that are not to be repeated, but they unfortunately has happened, and they are to be an example to not repeat these mistakes in the future. Now, let's talk briefly about the stakeholders involved by motions that were not tackled by proposition team. First of all, we have the public, the audience, the viewers of these works of art. They are the most vulnerable stakeholder because they are the most impacted by this motion. And as we said, they would be deprived of their identity and their past, their history, something that represents what they were and what the people before them were. Now, also, among these people, we also have people who love art, so art lovers. They are even more impacted because they will also lose something that gives them pleasure, basically. So something that they really care about, and they would also lose that part of themselves. Secondly, as our second stakeholder, we have artists. They would be limited in their expression, and not only artists who are still alive, because we also take them into consideration. They would be limited in their human expressions, but also artists who are dead. An artist being dead is not a good reason to not respect what they did when they were alive. And so we must respect what they did and their works. Then thirdly, our third argument, our third stakeholder, no, thank you, is art critics, because they would basically lose part of their job, especially if you consider critics that are mainly focused on those periods of history that are nowadays considered outdated, with outdated values. And lastly, our last stakeholder is the public administration, because of course the removal of these works of art is made by the public administration, and they would lose their credibility to the eye of the public, and this would also lead, as we will demonstrate, social tensions. Now, what are the metrics of the debate that we will follow and that will lead us to victory? Now, our main metric is identity. Preserving the people's identity is a key part, because it's one of the main functions of art. Secondly, our second value as a metric is humanity, because, as we said, the second most important value of art is preserving, is expressing the humanity of the people and of the artists in particular. And lastly, our last metric is the social stability and, in general, the audience comfort in society, because when people are attached to a work of art and they get it removed, then this inevitably leads to social tensions. Now, what is the team line that we will use to demonstrate that our position is better? It is made of three arguments. Our first argument says that the removal of the previously mentioned works of art would negatively affect and impact the people, depriving them of their identity, their past, and their history. Secondly, we think that the removal of the works of art would deprive artists of their freedom of expression and credibility to the eye of the public, of the audience, and would also damage their position in society. And lastly, this removal of works of art would inevitably make public administration lose their credibility, leading to social instability. Now, moving on to our first argument. As we said, we think that removing these works of art would weaken society's connection to their past and their identity. Now, let's analyze once again, what is art? Art is inevitably a reminder of the history, identity, and evolution of a group of people. It could be a people, a nation, a society. Now, even when we don't agree with the values that are portrayed by these works of art, that still remains historical evidence. It still remains a sign of the passage of those people on Earth, what they did, and we have to remember that history also defines our present, because we are what we are today because of what we were yesterday. Now, what we do when we remove works of art is give people a sanitized, a purified version of history that, could seem better to the eye, but it is actually an incomplete history, of course, because history is not only made of good things, it is unfortunately made of a lot of bad things, and we cannot delete them. Deleting them would mean to make a manipulation of history, and this manipulation of history, it's a typical sign of dictatorships. During the course of history, dictators tried in any way to delete the art that was not conform to their values, therefore manipulating history, manipulating art, and manipulating people's identity and ideas. So, what are the impacts of this? This would lead to a loss of collective identity, because people will not find themselves in an identity, a historical identity anymore, and a manipulation of history that will only make damage, because it will give a version of history that is purified, but that is not effective to define our reality. And with this, I conclude my speech. Thank you.
8 and 27. Stefano, okay. We are okay. So let's go to the second speaker from proposition team. I think she is Francesca Silvestri.
Yes.
Anyone?
I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Hello, everybody. I am the second speaker of the proposition team. What can you expect from my speech? So I'll first start by rebuttaling some things that were said by the op team, by the first speaker of the opposition team, and then I'll move on to our final argumentation. There are actually many things I want to say. I'm going to try to make my speech quite organized. I think the main misunderstanding of the opposition team, regardless of what we've stated, or regardless of what the motion is stating, is the fact of the erasure of historical evidence. That I think is a big point. So what the opposition stated is that by removing these pieces of art that I want to remind are honorizing, normalizing, enhancing some values that everybody recognizes are as wrong, such as colonialism, such as misogyny, such as racism, anti-Semitism, and all of these things. So things that are generally by every single person recognized as wrong, or at least by the state, by the democracy, call it whatever you want. By removing these pieces of art, we are historical evidence. Now,
POI.
Yes, go ahead.
Do you think that exposure is a synonym for acceptance of those values?
Okay, I can see where you're going with this. Basically, if I am being exposed, first of all, I think there's one main thing to mention here. Not everybody accepts the values that this thing is putting on, but I am going to be exposed to these things. And first of all, I did not choose that. I'm walking to my school, I'm going to the metro, I'm going to whatever. I'm being exposed to something that I did not have to be exposed to, first of all. So honestly, it needs to be values that everybody recognizes. Otherwise, I'm being exposed to something that I don't see myself fitting into, and I'm going to feel alienated and not represented by my state, first of all. Second of all, maybe I won't agree with that value. Maybe I won't take that value with me, but some people might. Some people are fanatics. Some people might see that as a praising of some value that nobody accepts, but just these people don't. And they see that as a, incentive to keep on believing these things and keep on fanatizing. So this is what I wanted to say to your POI. This is the distinction that we need to make. So going back to the erasure of historical evidence, right? We are not deleting history. We are removing it from the streets. It's a very different thing. Removing is not deleting. We are not taking every single statue and going there and just destroying them up there. Also, another thing that was mentioned that I think was completely unrelated to the motion was the art lovers, the pleasure of art. We're not destroying these. No, thank you. We're not destroying these pieces of art in front of anybody. What we are doing is saying, okay, this is a public space. Many people are going to be exposed to this. Things that they're not going to, they're exposed to a public space that's it's everybody's space and no one's space at the same time. So I don't know. I don't agree with colonial exposure. Maybe I am also, I have had trauma regarding these issues, and that's a re-traumatizing me. I'm being exposed to things that are I'm vulnerable to. And this is also a thing that was mentioned by the opposition team. The opposition team stated audience is vulnerable, and we do agree with this. Audience is extremely vulnerable, and audience should be legitimized. The audience should be looked after in this case. So what I wanted to say was, again, we are not erasing anything. What we are doing is taking it off of places.
Yeah.
Everybody can look at them. No, thank you. What we are doing is refusing to keep praising these things. One thing that we defined was it's not just, one thing I wanted to address. For example, you walk down to Berlin, right? There are many different statues, many different memorials of Nazism, for example, but it's an incredibly different thing. A statue of Hitler, for example, a statue of a dictator that was made by people that praise the dictator and that put it in the, inside of a square saying, okay, this is what we need. This is our father. This is what we need to praise. That's one thing, and that needs to be deleted. And that's why, for example, it's actually no, thank you. It's illegal to have these exposure of these things because that's not a good thing. And then in Berlin, though, we do see some memorials, some statues that aren't praising any wrong value, but they are instead saying we did a very big mistake. We need to remember these are two completely different things. One thing is having a work of art that enforces that. No, thank you. Honors these wrong values that, again, everybody doesn't agree with. If there are values that are wrong, that everybody commonly agrees are wrong. And another thing is having some works of art that actually do have some sort of prevention and some sort of, thought behind. That's one thing. Also about losing identity. We do agree that we are the result of all the years that came before us. But then I want to ask you again, what I wanted to ask with your POI, if I am, for example, a person walking down the street, maybe I am a woman and I see a misogynistic statue. I do agree that maybe in order to get where I am, I had to fight some misogynistic things that, people before me had to do some things. But the thing is that I want that to be erased. I want that to not represent what we are now. I want the place that is public to recognize and to enforce and enhance the values we democratic people represent. No, thank you. Other things I wanted to address, yes, the expressing. Also, one thing I wanted to say for further ado, can you clarify and mechanize and characterize what you mean by public administration losing credibility? Because that wasn't very clear to us. So if you can engage with that afterwards. And then about manipulating art and manipulating history. We are not being dictators. We are not enforcing on people some values that are wrong. We are trying to get off of the public space values that are wrong. So we're not trying to impose anything. We're just trying to keep protected the vulnerability of the people that need to be exposed to these things that did not choose to be exposed to these things. This is really important, please. Now I'll move to my last argumentation, which is the one about democratic legitimacy. So public spaces, again, must reflect the living community. Public spaces need to feel like they belong to everyone. If we state, keep honoring art that embodies values, outdated hierarchies or colonialism, we are undermining that shared ownership that makes civic life so thriving. Public spaces are a shared living room of a society. Everybody grows there, everybody lives there, everybody grows up there. So public spaces are a public statement of who we honor, no, thank you, and what we consider admirable. In a democracy, legitimacy means exactly that all citizens are equal and co-workers of that space. So allowing a moral worldview of a past to keep shaping to their shared identity is completely wrong. Imagine, for example, being a citizen that has a living memory, for example, a living memory of colonialism or racism or, gender inequality. I am going to be exposed to something that makes me live again and trigger that violence that I've experienced. And again, I did not choose that. Again, also, I am going to be, for example, again, an Afro-American that's walking and I see the conqueror who brings civility and the colonial domination is all good. I am going to feel alienated. I'm going to feel like this public space, this city, this state doesn't feel like mine. Where do I even belong? Like, this isn't what I stand for. This isn't what I'm here for. Again, also, as we were saying before, I'm going to feel an unavoidable humiliation, emotional harm, because I can't just opt out not walking down that road since it's public. I am going to have to face it. So again, for all these reasons, because it is an enforcement of values, because we still keep on being enforced and still keep on being taught at schools without having to have these things on pedestals. And because we need to have public spaces that embody our democracy, those are all the reasons why I'm proud to propose, and all my teammates are proud to propose, and why we firmly believe that these public statues should be taken off when they are completely against moral values that are generally recognized. I conclude my speech. Thank you very much.
8 and 27. Okay, Stefano and Tila, you okay? Okay, very good. Let's go to the second speaker from opposition team, and I think is Carlos Pan. Yeah, yes.
Yeah, just a second. Okay. Okay, so if everyone's ready, I will start. So, okay. Panel, if we forsake art as a society, as a people, we forsake our past. We are erasing part of our history. We, as opposition, acknowledge today absolutely that history isn't always positive and it is not all sunshine and rainbows, but this is precisely why we must continue to remember what happened in the past, even if it's not the most comfortable thing for us to do. We have the duty of remembering for us and for the people who will be our successors in the future. Panel, in my speech, three main things. First of all, some framework clarifications, then moving on with some rebuttals about that third argument, and lastly, the development of the two closing arguments of our side as opposition. But let's proceed with order, and let's start by clarifying some framework assumptions that have been brought forward by proposition in this debate. And I will show you very clearly why they're misinterpreting the motion and shifting the debate on their side. So, first of all, let's clarify a very fundamental point. Proposition is confusing wrong values, I refuse, wrong values with outdated ones without mechanizing how precisely they make a distinction between good or bad values. The solution is quite and really simple, because that there aren't things that are such as good or bad values. Values can be classified as good or bad. There are only different ways of interpreting them. So what we tell you is that we must not remove these kind of monuments, these works of art, from public spaces, because there is not a single distinction that is very clear of how we should actually do it, and proposition doesn't mechanize it and doesn't explain this. I refuse. Then another clarification, they have brought forward the example of if me as an African American, I see the statue of a colonialist, I should be offended and I should have every right of erasing it. So as I said before, history isn't all sunshine and rainbows. We can't just erase the parts of history that we don't like. And why shouldn't we erase these kind of statues? Because if me as an African American see the statue of a colonialist, I know that we as a society, we've moved on. So this doesn't actually represent any threat to my person, and it doesn't have any actual effect on me. But then another clarification is about the definition of public spaces. So they tell you that only public spaces are only those who are managed by the governments or public entities. But they forgot to take into account, according to their definition, of public museums. So how would you relocate all of the monuments that you would say to do so if they can't be moved? Let's make a really clear example. Let's take the Colosseum, the most important symbol of Rome. Okay, just because its values are outdated, as they would be saying, because slaves worked in there, gladiators worked in there, people were forced to fight to death just for the amusement of the people. Should we remove it just because it publicized these values? First of all, it can be removed. It's unfeasible. How do you pretend? How do you actually expect to move the Colosseum from one space to another? And then most of all, you can't move it because it would take away a huge part of our history as Italians, and also it would be a huge loss for the world just by privatizing it. And this is why the case doesn't stand. But then moving on to the third argument, which is all based on democratic legitimacy. Their claim is that if I am in a public space, so I'm on the same level as my fellow citizens, we are all on the same level. So if I feel offended from some works of art that I might find in the place, I should have every right of removing it. This is one for two main reasons. First of all, I've already explained to you why these monuments don't always have the negative effect that they have shown they should have. But then, two, how would you treat the people that actually are offended by removing this monument? If we still think about removing the Colosseum, as they would do, because it's their proposal to do so, what about all of the people that would feel offended about the removal of such a fundamental monument for our history? The point is that proposition today is giving away our history just because some people feel offended, but they do not feel offended in the first place. And second of all, even if they were in their best case scenario, we are willing to keep pieces of our history just because we are not willing to just take them away because someone feels offended. But that being said, let's move on with our two last arguments. Our second argument first. What's our claim today? Our claim is that their proposal will deprive artists and critics of ways of making money and express themselves. So how does this work? Let's analyze the two main stakeholders that are involved in this point. So first of all, artists. We can divide them in two main points. Artists that are still with us, that are still alive, and artists from the past that are dead. So what do they have in common? They all made art in a way to be remembered by the future generations and leave something to us. Their goal was to leave something to humanity. So according to their proposal, these artists would have their work removed or still taken away in other spaces that do not actually give them value. So these artists wouldn't be able to work anymore because their works couldn't be exposed and they wouldn't have any money from it. And also they wouldn't be able to express themselves. And this is a huge loss as a society, as long as we think about that, we are preventing some people from expressing themselves. But then to the second stakeholder, are the art critics. If we remove some kind of art, all the art critics that are specialized in this kind of art, in this art genre, will be prevented from working and also from expressing themselves. Their proposal creates a bottleneck where only some art genres are allowed to be public. So, according to the proposal, if we think about Renaissance, Renaissance was all about religion and religious themes. So, if we as a society don't align anymore with such religious values, should we remove all of these portraits and all of these works of art that are extremely beautiful, extremely valuable for our society? I don't think so. So these are three main impacts. First of all, we lose jobs, so people suffer. We instead keep these jobs, and this is better. Two, they make us lose means of expression while we maintain them. And three, one second, we create Series B art compared to others. To us, instead, art has all the same value. Yes, PPI?
I think it's protected from that line.
Okay. So
PI.
why are our impacts way more than theirs? For two main points. First of all, scale, because we affect all of society in a positive way while they damage all of it. But then two, on severity, because they make us lose identity while we protect it ourselves. But then moving on to a third argument. Their proposal will create social instability. How does this work? Really quickly. First of all, if we remove some genres, people will be damaged because art lovers would be damaged because we would be taking away a passion for them, and people would be internally damaged because their identity would be denied. So the state loses credibility, and people have discomfort, and this causes social instability. That's how we mechanize it. But then this has two main impacts. First of all, state loses credibility, and a state without credibility doesn't stand and doesn't work efficiently. Instead, we keep it efficient. Then second impact, it creates social instability, while instead we grant social instability as a position. So these are the two main points according to why we should reject emotion. First of all, their proposal will deprive artists and critics of means of expression and gaining a way of living. And two, it will create social instability. This is why we believe that we must reject emotion. We believe that art mustn't be forsaken just for because it's offensive to someone, and we would create social instability and damage stakeholders. With this, I conclude. Thank you.
8 and 27. Delay is okay. Yes. Stefan is okay. Yes, very good. So let's go to the first speaker from proposition team. And I think is Alonso. Yes. Yes, very good. Sofia, very good.
Only 1 second, sorry. Okay, I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Before starting, let's ask ourselves, are monuments morally neutral reminders or public endorsements of values? Today, I want to analyze what the points of clash that emerged during this debate were. The first one is the one about endorsement versus normalization and neutrality. So public display is an act of collective approval. Public monuments aren't passive objects. They have to represent community. This is why we want to ensure that nobody feels hurt. We want to ensure that the state that we live in is actually a place where everybody feels represented. Visibility in civic space, in civical spaces, isn't neutral. It is normative. So art is the one expressing the good values stays in. We never said that we wanted to delete the art. This is something that the opponents totally misleaded, totally misunderstood, because we never said that we want to erase or to put away the art. We just want to relocate it. That does not mean that art will not exist ever again. Also, you talked about the critics, the stakeholders, according to you, that will lose their jobs, but art will still be art. There will still be plenty of art that do not represent the bad values and that can be analyzed or do whatever, or they can keep their job just because we're just because we're relocating some of the monuments, just some of the monuments that express the bad feelings that people get hurt over. It does not mean that those people cannot pursue their work anymore. Moreover, states like Germany will not lose their credibility if they put away a statue of Hitler that is in the streets, and people, every time they pass in front of it, they cry because the Shoah has caused so much trouble. It has caused so much grief to people. On the other side, the opposition team claimed that this place is an endorsement. If so, then why do we remove the statues of the dictators after the regime ends, after the things change? Public art shapes the collective memory and moral hierarchy. Then with this narrative, you're totally legitimizing outdated and harmful values. Also, to answer to, I believe, the second speaker that talked about, is there a good or bad value? Can racism be interpreted as good? Can apartheid be interpreted as good? Can the Shoah be interpreted as good? So repeated exposure, no thank you, makes harmful ideas feel ordinary. This is what we prove to you, because children do not read it plates and be like, oh, I will analyze, no thank you, I will analyze what this means. They will just absorb what is honored. They will just absorb it and start honoring that. It is totally bad for the community, for the people that do not understand, for the tourists that will go to that site and see and be like, why do you have a brutal figure that is honored? And what do you reply? Because it's history? That does not make sense. Also, expression. Art can be expression. You can express art in your room, in your house, as long as it's not in the streets. You cannot, as I said, the expression has to be everybody's expression. So your own art is your expression of yourself, of your feeling. That is totally safe, appreciated, loved. But the moment that it enters the public streets, it has to represent everybody that lives in the community. No, I'm sorry. I will now move on with the second point of clash, which is the one about democracy and tradition. So the equilibrium between the memory, which is not veneration, and the oblivion is called liberty. The liberty of people to live in that country, to feel represented, and to not have to mourn and grieve over the things that they see everywhere passing in the streets. We remember without celebrating, because history is present in books, in scholarships, and everywhere around us. We don't need people to feel heard of what they see. So public spaces belong to all citizens, including the marginalized ones, especially those, because apartheid transforms the shared, a monument talking about apartheid that influences that, sees apartheid as great and venerates it, transform the shared civic space into a site of exclusion, because there cannot be democracy when the glorifying of these values, of this hatred, is still pursued. So the Colosseum, to answer to what you said, is an historical site. It is not a monument that glorifies the violence of the past as a statue of Mussolini or Hitler in the middle of the streets does. On the other side, we feed a tradition. So if a citizen perceives the public space, I will end this and I'll accept the POI, sorry. If a citizen perceives the public space as hostile and humiliating, then the state has totally failed. Because what if a girl whose grandma suffered discrimination walks through the city, a city square, and sees a statue honoring the ideology of justified discrimination? She feels unwelcomed in that place. She feels unwelcome in that state. I will now accept the POI.
Where does this phenomenon actually happen? Do you have any examples that show how people are hurt from this explicitly?
Well, let's make it really personal. If I suffer, my family, my mom was killed in concentration camps, and the day after, and tomorrow, I just go to the streets and I pass next to, a square where there's a figure of Mussolini with the Nazi salute. Do I feel welcome in that place? Would you feel welcome? Well, you have to put yourself in the shoes of every person in a community in order to live in in a good community, you have to put yourself in the shoes of any other person living there. You cannot be the only one judging from 10 steps back. I will now move on with the third point of class, which is the one about the history and the celebration. So historical importance explains preservation, not celebration. History exists in books, archives, scholarships, pedestral adds praise. So we want to remember without harming the people, without celebrating the cruelty. A school square displays a statue praising rigid hierarchies. No, thank you. What are the students going to think of that? Inequality is tradition. Is that what they're going to think of that? Is that what the idea with what they're going to grow and just mature their beliefs? This is totally unacceptable. And you stand on the side of celebration because you think that this removal will erase history, but it actually, we prove to you how it will not, because we just want to relocate the pieces of art in question that do have intrinsically in it some morals that are totally bad and totally harmful, not only for the people that lived, but for all the other people that are looking, because this violence can be perpetrated in days ahead, not just because it's in the past, it stays in the past. So history is people, it's its experiences, it's books. Not placing a huge monument of Hitler in a square. We do not want to burn that history. We just want to put it aside so the people will not suffer, because the place where I live, it's everybody's place. So living in a democratic society, this is exactly the good part of it, because everybody is going to be embraced, everybody's going to be understood. Let's now move on to the worst case scenario. My worst case scenario is that we relocate the art, but we still keep the history. Your worst case scenario is that you keep celebrating injustice for centuries, and this violence will be perpetrated for generations ahead, and this hatred will be seen as something to follow, as an ideal to follow. Which error is reversible? I will leave you with that question. Hopefully you'll answer, but this is why today as a team we're so proud to propose. I ended my speech. Thank you.
8 minutes and 23 seconds.
Sorry, sir, your mic was
Our
up.
judges ready? Yeah, thank you. Yes, they are. So, please, third speaker from opposition team, Kendra, please, when you want.
Thank you, Chair. My speech will start in 3, 2, 1. Panel, there is one word I will use to describe what has been brought by the government house today, and that is contradiction. An extreme contradiction coming from different side, coming from different perspective. In my speech, not only am I going to analyze the reason why this contradiction is present in the framework, first, second, and third argument, but why is it also present in their impact, and therefore why this contradiction is the path to their defeat during this debate. But let's go backward and analyze what is contradictional about our framework. So the whole proposal was about stating and going after what is the meaning, the true meaning of outdated. And do you know what's the only definition of outdated that side proposition brought to the house? Is the value of outdated which equals violence. Very fair and square. Of course, violence is not a value that we want to propose to our public. But do you know what are other values that are considered outdated today? Church and religion, or also announcing our physical aspect, and all of the art that is built, especially our country as Italy and Europe. You know what does it base on? It based on church and all the pieces of art coming from churches, coming from the ecclesiastical world, and physical aspects, thinking about the kalos kaiagatos value coming from the Greek statue, coming from the Greek art. So therefore, since those are values that are actually outdated in our society, because of course we do not follow these kind of values, are those supposed to be removed as well, because it's too easy, I believe, to just state that we should remove art because it's violent and offensory. But what about the preserving art itself? What about preserving history? Side government today never tackled this. But going forward, another piece of contradiction that comes from the affair world is the idea of removing piece of art because we shouldn't go after, and I quote, collective memory. But do you know what is their answer to this? It's to say, oh, we're removing it from the public. Sure, but then we're keeping it. First of all, why do you keep it in the first place? You tell me what the answer was. We keep it because it has historical value, fair and square. But what is the sense of keeping a piece of art because of the historical value if you do not allow people to interact with that art, if you do not allow people to learn from that art? What side proposition today I've stated is that the reason why we should remove this art is because it makes people suffer in some cases. They quote Nazism, I refuse, misogynism, fair and square. But do you truly believe that just removing pieces of art is enough to A, remove their suffering, and B, actually educating people about this issue? Because that's one thing, and another thing that side proposition didn't even tackle once is the educative value of art. The fact that art, even if it represents a period of history that might not be seen along with today's values, it teaches something. What does Nazism teaches us? That those for this and this and this reasons, we shouldn't, I refuse, we should defend human rights, we should do this and this. This is what this art teaches us. Of course, the values might not be aligned with today's date, but how can people actually learn the mistakes coming from the past if they're unable and deprived from the opportunity to go after that? I refuse. But you know, another very interesting thing is that a side proposition, I quote from the first speaker, said that what they announced is the fact that remembering art does not mean glorifying. Do you know why this is interesting? Because that is the mere value that not only was brought by my side of the house through this entire debate. Because of course, the reason why we have the Colosseum out there is definitely not because we want to bring gladiators and people being eaten alive by animals, but because we go after, because we read the integrity of the value of art itself. And that means that by having it there, we do not glorify those values, but we want to remember. We want to have a commemorative history. We want to have art that teaches us the mistakes and the events I refuse from the past. That is the values that comes from side opposition today. And side opposition, what do? They try to shift their path to the ballot. They try to shift their trajectory, trying to make us believe that is their core. That is the core of their message. How is that in the first place when you don't allow people to be in touch with this? So please, I would really be interested to see how side proposition today will tackle this issue in the first place. But going after the memorial, I refuse. The memorial value of art. Again, museums. You talk about slavery. Of course, people suffer from slavery. But don't you think that people whose ancestors lived slavery appreciated the fact that there are museums out there that are made to sensibilize the issue of slavery in the first place, that are made to make people aware that these events were, in fact, a tragedy, and therefore we shouldn't do it again? What side proposition is bringing to the house is a total removal of these pieces of art and thinking that books and thinking that words can be enough for people to be in touch with pieces of history. I refuse. And side opposition today doesn't agree with that. But then let's go after one of the biggest issue as well, which was the issue of values again. So to summarize what I've been saying, there are three reasons why the mechanization of this agreement does not fall for side opposition. First, people do not learn when you remove art. By just removing art, you're not announcing the educational value of art. Second, you don't defend people's states. Please, side proposition, how did you tackle the stakeholder of people as we did today? We tackled that there are people that actually appreciate, maybe not Nazis, I'll take it later, maybe not Nazis art, but church art, maybe Greek art, which are still embodiment of values that are not present today. Please state, how do you tackle this stakeholder in your speeches? Go on, please, with the POI.
Are you aware of the fact that we said many times that we do not want to erase them, but we want to relocate them to control the storage where they can actually be taught correctly?
First of all, I hope you realize how contradictory your question is. Because if you tell me that this thing are being stored to them being taught correctly, understand that that means that the public will have interaction with this piece of art in the first place. So that's one thing. Second thing, I understand. I heard you when you said, when your team said that you are going to relocate it. What I'm saying is that the value of history cannot be taught properly when you deprive people of those pieces of art in the first place. How will people be in touch with what slavery really was if they don't touch with hand, maybe chains or old clothes that were in fact things used during that time? How would people will be able to reason and immerse in that reality and therefore learn from history mistakes? I would really like side opposite proposition to tackle with this issue. As I was saying, the second thing that does not go after is the fact that they do not value memory. The whole core is to say that they don't want people to suffer, and therefore that's why we should remove it. But please, let's remember, our society, we're almost all adults. If you do not engage with what made you suffer, you will never heal. And the reason why we have museums, the reason why we keep these pieces of art is to be able to teach our society what was wrong and to heal it as well. So then going after with the clash points and which are the reasons why we follow our path to the pilot and why we win this debate. First, two clashes: identity versus values. We stated that art is the core source of our identity and therefore brings us to be in touch with it. What's our position? Neo tackles that. Neo tackles any stakeholder in the first place, and that already is enough for us to win this debate. Lastly, outdated. How can a team pretend to win if they're not even able to give a proper definition of what it stands under the in the first place? I really like them to engage with that. And with this, it concludes my speech, and I'm so proud to oppose today. Thank you.
8 and 25. Okay. Yes, Stefano, you're okay? Very well. So let's go to the last speaker from opposition team, and it should be Carlos Pan.
Yes. Okay. If everyone's ready, then I will start in 3, 2, 1. Panel, by the end of this debate, I think that the main and the most important question that you must ask ourselves and that needs an answer by the end of my speech is: what role do we want art to play in our society? What value do we give to art? And what is art to us? What does art give us as a society? And why shouldn't we erase parts of art just because they are uncomfortable for us, while they still actually teach something as a society to us? So, two main stances in this debate. Proposition is all for removal, as they dispatch it as relocation of these such works of art. So they prejudicate identity of people. They say that a monument from your society can be taken away just because it doesn't reflect current values, outdated values. We instead, as opposition, are all for identity, humanity, and social stability. These are our three main points. These are the three metrics that in this debate we've shown you to be coherent with our points. In this speech, three main clashes on which opposition and proposition have taken complete different stances. Let me explain them to you. First and most important clash of all, the role of art in society. So what does proposition tell you today in this debate? So they tell you that art can damage us, so because it reminds us of negative moments. But first of all, they haven't mechanized how this happens in the real world. They weren't able to provide actual examples of when this happens. Their ideas were completely theoretical. But then They tell that the celebration that they celebrate negative events. This doesn't happen. Showing something is different from celebrating it, and I hope we've made it clear. We've made it clear through our first three speeches. Instead, what do we as opposition tell you on the role of art in society? We tell you that it reminds us of our past, and for this exact reason, it doesn't necessarily celebrate. And so it is fundamental for us as a society because art is also remembrance of what we did wrong in the past. And this is why we must remove it always. But then second clash about identity. So what does proposition tell you about identity? They completely minimize it by telling you that identities doesn't matter as long as some parts of society are supposedly hurt. First of all, they aren't hurt because we've shown you that this doesn't actually happen in the status quo. And they tell you that celebration is what damages. But we've told you that actually showing something is different from celebrating it. So this doesn't stand. We instead as opposition value identity much more than anything else. We believe that identity is fundamental for our people just to exist in the first place. But then the last clash point, how do we deal with art? A clash about relocation and removal. What does the proposition tell you? They shift the motion by just saying that they do not remove monuments, but by relocating them. Still, even if they're in their best case scenario, even if these monuments are relocated, people still interacted with them. So we don't see where the advantages that they've told you would emerge. We instead as opposition maintain the status quo. We believe that the status quo works where these works of art are public for everyone and everyone can access to them because they are fundamental and they do not celebrate negative events. They just remember them for us. But still, why do we win on the metrics? First of all, we ensure identity for people. They don't because they strip away parts of our history. We ensure humanity because we tell you that art mustn't be taken away, and three, we ensure social stability because we don't make people feel bad just because we need to remove some parts of art. But still, we win on weighing. And why is that? We win on scale because we affect positively everyone, while they affect negatively everyone. Our impacts are much more impactful than theirs for this reason. And then we win on severity because their impacts are much worse than ours, as long as they prejudicate the complete humanity of people. So panel, by the end of this debate, three clear reasons why to reject the motion. First of all, it will negatively impact people's perception of identity and their past. Second of all, it will deprive artists and art critics of sources of income and expression. And most of all, three, it will create discomfort in society and lead to social instability. With this, I conclude. So proud to oppose.
4 minutes and 41 seconds. Yes, if Stefano and Tylee are okay, we can go to the very last speaker of this debate, Francesca Silvestri. Please take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Again, we've come to the conclusion of this debate. My main job here is to thoroughly analyze the points of clash, even though I won't go too deeply into it because my teammate has done it quite astonishingly. And then I'll just do a comparison of the two worlds that we have presented to you today and ultimately prove to you why, again, I'm very proud to propose. This debate here, a very thought-provoking one, was never about whether history was messy or not, because of course we all agree it is. It's very complex. It has very different layers. The real question is, what do we allow the public to endorse? That was what the debate was regarding and rotating around. Now, our side drew one clear line at the very beginning. We stated that public space is honorific. It's the place that the state uses to signal who deserves admiration, what values we share, and all of these things. Now, when an artwork of historical value actively expresses outdated values, such as glorifying slaveholders, colonial conquest, fascism, sexism, racism, it is not a neutral preservation, as what the opposition team was trying to tell us, but it is a continuous public honor. Now, opposition tried to escape that by calling everything history, it's history, so it needs to stay there. It's history. But that collapses with the key distinction of the round, which is remembering is not the same thing as praising. This, I think, was the main contradiction of opposition team. And also, talking about burdens, accepting our definitions of expressing values as valorizing and of outdated as wrong, and then shifting it in the third speech. I think that's what created most of the misunderstanding in this round. I'll move to my points of clash now. I've analyzed mainly two, and I hope I get through them to you quite clearly. The first one, I think, was the one about the public exposure to the public. What does that do? What opposition told us, it's that exposure is optional, it's fragile, it's not really that relevant. It's history, it's history, it's history. On the other side, what we've tried to prove to you is that this exposure is passive, it's unavoidable, it's humiliation, alienation, withdrawal. It normalizes hierarchies, normalizes values that nobody agrees on anymore. And therefore, OP never answered the core point, which was the state's choice in public space is not just art, but a message of membership. And therefore, it has very deep meaning and understandings in that. Point of clash, I think, was the one about whether the removal harms history or not. I think that was actually one of the most important things. Whether this removal would harm history, it wouldn't harm history. What the opposition team told us that yes, it would absolutely harm history. It would manipulate history, they stated, because it would offer a purified version. On the other side, I hope that we've proven to you today, I hope it came out clear that we are not harming history at all by removing these statues. In the streets, who are not studying history, you're being subjected to those values. It would only mean to stop praising them. They would not be deleted. It would just be removed. So you still have photos. You still find them in archives. And so it wouldn't harm history at all. In the end, ultimately, we've proven to you two different worlds. We have the opposition world, which is a world where you keep the work in the squares because it is history. The best case scenario is most people would ignore it, but the honor value still stands behind. People would, again, the public is fragile, is vulnerable. They would still feel tackled and undermined. And then the worst case scenario of that is that extremists finally have a place to live, and then the vulnerability of these people, many people will feel attacked and re-traumatized, humiliated, like these issues would be normalized. And of course, we do not want that. That is extremely wrong, and we all agree on that. And then we have the pro team, where the best case scenario is a square that is a shared place with no alienation, with shared problems. And then the worst case scenario in the end, it would be the loss of tradition. But still, again, we'd still have photos. And that is a big trade with the waning of losing, finally ending, continues in an unavoidable symbolism and harm. So again, I'm very proud to propose for this motion. Thank you.
4 minutes and 21 seconds. Okay, as you already know, you have to open up all your microphones and clap your hands, okay? Okay, we see you later. We are going to do our job, okay? I will stop recording, first of all. Okay. Okay, stop recording. Very well.